Welcome back again, everyone, to Friends Occasionally Not Disagreeing. This is Cody, and I'm here with Justin this week, and it's just the two of us because our other friends are lame. And
Life gets in the way.
Joe's scared of movies as well. So Joe's sitting out Spooktober because he's afraid of scary things. So
Sadness.
in that way, Justin and Joe are the opposite person. But
I mean, yeah, I can't disagree with that.
so we were going to have Brett with us tonight, but something came up on his end, and then also our friend Tony was going to phone in here from California with us tonight, but he unfortunately couldn't make the time adjustment. It's pretty hard for us to all coordinate because we're spread across 4 time zones here. So this is, or 3, well, yeah, 4 time zones.
Yeah.
3 time zone difference, I guess, hour-wise, but East Coast, West Coast, we got everybody in here. So
yeah.
Anyway, we're continuing on Spooktober here. We're going to talk about scary movies tonight. But before we do that, we'll give Justin a chance to tell us what he's been up to since our last podcast.
Okay. Really kind of more of the same. Really diving headfirst into the whole Spooktober, spirit, as it were. Where I've been trying to, for this podcast, I was looking through, horror movies I haven't watched in a long time and trying to see if I could dig up any new ones that might deserve a spot on the list. Same thing with horror games. I've really been looking away at my, my backlog to see if there's any that, should make my top 10 there. And I think I may have found one or two. So, in between that, it's been, crazy stuff at work. Like, well, it's not really crazy if it's normal, I guess, but
well, it could be both, I think.
I suppose, yeah. But yeah, more of the same there. But really been enjoying getting back to my horror roots because I've always liked horror as a genre, and I love this time of year because it's centers and focuses so much on that. So that's been pretty much it for me. Awesome. What about you, Cody?
Well, I was mentioning, I don't know if it was in our chat we keep on the side or what, but my left arm has been hurting a lot recently, and I was worried it could be like a health issue. And then I think I realized it's actually from holding boards and drills and things overhead for the past so many days. I've been working on my Halloween party, particularly this one giant game in the basement, for just days and days and days and days and days, to the point where I have more built and set up at this point than I have ever had this far, I should say, from the party. So it's kind of intriguing that, like, the whole thing is being developed, but there's still 2 weeks left to go yet.
So is this something you needed to go to the housing commission for to get permits to construct?
I think it's legal because it's in my house, but I'm not positive. So I've been working on just that nonstop. Today actually was going to be the first day in like 10 days I didn't work down there, and then lo and behold, I ended up having like a half-hour stretch. So I was waiting for my wife and daughter to come home with dinner, and I was like, well, I could go down and just do a little bit down here, I suppose. So that's been the vast majority of my time, but I did get a chance to watch a couple TV shows right before we started recording tonight. My wife and I finally got back into the Rings of Power, which we had left off, I think, somewhere in like episode 3 or 4. We just finished the episode where the Harfoots are finally leaving their village, whatever that is, 3 or 4. And then we also caught up and finished She-Hulk. The finale, as this airs, was on yesterday, so I'm sure we'll probably talk about that at some point. But it was one of the more unique finales I've ever. It was one of the more unique pieces of television I've ever seen. Let's even put it that far. I wouldn't just say finale. It was definitely different. So
interesting.
And then that's really about it, I would say. We've just been kind of keeping up with our usual. Lego Masters is back on, and The Masked Singer we've been watching again, and I've been watching some wrestling on the side, but that's really about it for me. So okay, well, let's kick this off here, I guess. So we're talking about our scary movies today. We had originally a top 10, and then when some of the other hosts kind of couldn't make it, we ended up expanding it to top 15. We do have some honorable mentions as well in here.
And we should also note, I was just going to say,
no, go ahead,
Tony did send us a list of some of his favorites, so we will be working those in as we go as well.
Yes, good note. Justin, I guess before we even jump into the honorable mentions, I just wanted to ask, like, what has drawn you to this particular movie genre in your lifetime, and did you find making this list to be easier or harder than you expected, or something else?
Well, I've always liked spooky stuff ever since I was a kid. It helped that my parents didn't really put too much of limitations on what I watched. I mean, they drew the line at nudity and sex and that sort of thing, but horror movies in general, as long as there wasn't really any of that sort of thing, they trusted me enough to know fact from fiction to, where they let me watch them. Like one of my earliest memories of watching these things was an Alien ripoff called Leviathan, which was set under the ocean and
Hmm.
had this like shape changing sea monster that people had like mouths opening on their hands and that sort of thing. It was
Oh, wow.
probably something I shouldn't have been watching when I was like 7, but my parents, they were fairly laissez-faire on that sort of thing, and I've always liked. I think part of it has always been the effects because back then it was all practical effects, and seeing this stuff on the screen, it was just amazing. What people were able to do with like putty and animatronics and things like that. Um, and that was the stuff you didn't really get in other types of genres of movies, at least not to that extent. And it was always just fascinating to me going into one of these flicks and not quite knowing what you would see in terms of like not necessarily just the gore, but like the makeup, the set design, the scares that people would come up with. And I guess getting down to brass tacks, it was the originality, the creativity that is behind horror that
Hmm.
has always drawn me to it. Yeah, there's a lot of derivative stuff out there, but when you get a really inventive, good, well put together horror flick, it's not like anything else out there. And I've I've just always been drawn to that side of cinema.
Okay. Did you find making this list easy or hard then?
Um, it was easier when it was top 10. Once we added that extra 5 because
Hmm.
people kept leaving, it was like, oh well, there's a lot of films that I enjoy that I feel could be part of this. So that was actually the trickiest part. The last 5, trying to figure out, okay, what deserves to be in that versus this is just something I would watch but I don't consider a classic, for lack of a better term.
Yeah, that's interesting. So when you make a list like this for our episodes, do you more or less try to create the list of 10, or do you try to rank them, or do you, because I'm kind of the opposite. So what I did with this is
Hmm.
I had a very hard time with this list, and the biggest problem wasn't like picking the ones I liked more than others. To me, it was trying to think back to all the scary movies I've seen in my life. So
Hmm.
I actually consulted like scary movies of the 70s list, 80s, 90s, thousands, tens, classics, and then I was kind of pulling off all those into this big
Hmm.
master list I had, and then I tried to pull from that like what my ranking would be. I'm sure I still forgot some, and I'd be pissed when somebody says a movie that I'm like, oh, I forgot about that one.
Oh, sure. I'm sure I probably forgot some along the way too, because I've seen just tons of these over the years.
Mm,
But yeah, I generally when I'm doing a list like this, I tend to think of ones that just stick in my memory, that left an impression that be it from the story, certain scares that were really well done, a well put together ending, just things that stood out to me that make a movie or game or what have you,
sure.
kind of stay with me for the long haul. Um, so I usually start there, and if I need to add a few more, I think back to other things I've enjoyed, or sometimes I might look like you did at lists to try and see if I can fill in any gaps that way. But in general, I if I see something I like or play something I like, it sticks with me. It lives in my head like for the rest of my life, and it's for me, it's fairly easy to pull those out and say, yeah, man, this was a great experience. That I would visit again in a heartbeat.
Yeah,
So,
that's awesome. Yeah, I guess just to answer my half of the horror thing, I guess I've always kind of enjoyed scary movies as well. Probably from a younger age, I would guess also, because I know my mom is really into scary things. She always had a Stephen King or Dean Koontz or somebody book on her bedstand or the coffee table or whatever. And she would watch a lot of scary things. My dad did also. I don't know that he was as excited about them. Like my mom still will like text me and be like, the girls are going to see this new scary movie that's coming out like Friday night. Like this is still something she does even now. So she still loves that. I do love them still. I will say I've probably fallen off quite a bit on watching most of the more modern ones. So I apologize if some of my list has some omissions from more recent years that should probably be in there, or ones I probably would enjoy if I got around to watching them, but I just haven't watched all of them, which is, I suppose the problem with any list if you break it down to it.
Right.
So
Yeah, I'm sure mine has some omissions from especially recent years as well, which is a shame because I gather there has been a lot of really solid horror that's come out.
This is what I hear.
Yeah, I have some that are fairly recent, but
okay.
Yeah.
Well, let's start. Should we kick into this?
Sure. Yeah.
Should we start with some honorable mentions? I should also mention to our audience, tonight will be the first bilingual podcast, as Justin will be mostly speaking in Japanese for his choices, I'm sure. But that's just me guessing. I don't really know. So
there's some foreign language films on here, definitely.
Okay, fair. Oh, dang, that's another good one I just thought of. Crap. All right.
Oh,
I might have to
put it on your honorable mentions.
Yeah. Okay. All right. I'll throw it on there.
Okay.
How many honorable mentions do you have? You said
I have 4.
You have 4. All right. So I have 5. And if I just think of this other one here, maybe no. I'll stick with the 5. I'll stick with the 5.
Okay.
I didn't think about it. So how about you want to go back and forth on these quick?
Sure. Yeah. Since you have one more, you start and
sounds good. There. All right. My first honorable mention is classic. It is The Shining, which is Kubrick, Stephen King, obviously. Great combo on this one. Fantastic. Has some extremely explosively scary parts to it. Also, like that really creepy atmosphere of being shut in the snow, and good setting. And Nicholson's performance is fantastic. The hotel is creepy. What keeps this one out of my top 5 proper to me is I feel like there are some stretches on this one that are, just for lack of a better word, a little bit slow. And you kind of got to get through that long desolation with the characters to get to the next exciting piece that's going to happen. So great movie, but it doesn't make my top 15.
That's fair. Similarly, my first honorable mention is the Blair Witch Project. Love it or hate it, you can't deny the impact it's had on the genre. Sure. Parts of it, yes, they were very slow, similar to like what you said about The Shining, but just the sheer vision behind the Blair Witch is something that I have to respect. It's a movie I have to be in the right mood to watch. It is something I'd watch again, but there are better films out there, but it had an impact, and I can't deny that.
All right, well, I will jump up here for my next honorable mention. It is The Blair Witch Project 2.
Book of Shadows?
That's right. On my honorable mentions. Here's why this is on my honorable mentions. The movie, not great. Movie itself wouldn't make it. Here's what I love about this movie, though, and I haven't seen it done with another one yet. The only thing I've seen come close to this was The Haunting of Hill House on Netflix, where they had the hidden ghost images all through the TV show that if you were kept a close eye for, you could see.
Okay.
I watched The Blair Witch Project 2 at my then girlfriend's house. Shout out to Katie. How are you? And we had another one of her friends there with us as well. So the 3 of us watched this in a house that had like a big window looking into the woods, and it was kind of creepy. And we watched the movie. It was okay. And then after the movie, this is where it gets fantastic. If you haven't seen this before, to your audience, they start to go through, if you haven't noticed, audience, as we were filming this movie, there were some odd things that happened, and let us go back and show them to you again. And so they point out these like 2 or 3, I'm sure, tricks of just CGI type things, but it really made the movie creepy. And then as you're like, whoa, that was weird, I didn't notice that as I was watching the movie. As you're doing this, there's a little rune symbol that flashes in the corner of the screen. All sorts of different runes that keep going through. And then when it's at the end of this little featurette, it says, press rewind and read the secret message. And we were like, wait, what? So then we hit rewind and went backwards, and it spells out 5 words. And you use these 5 words. It was like water. I don't remember what they all were, but it was like water, door, something, something, something. And it was to find hidden images that were in the film the first time you watched it that you had never seen. And so you'd go back and like look back at every scene where somebody had like a door or opened a door, and sure as shit, you'd find one, and there'd be like this super creepy face that like made itself as you were like watching the thing you had never seen. very similar actually to the Netflix show Haunting of Hill House. But I admit the movie's not great, but for that part alone, we had a ton of fun with that, and just going back and rewatching that.
Fair. I may actually have to revisit that one myself because I didn't even know about that.
You thought it was a bad movie. It is a
I
bad
did.
movie.
Speaking of bad movies,
Ooh.
my other honorable mention, again, not a good film at all, but one I enjoy to heck and back. Puppet Master 4, which is the goofiest one in the series by far, and that's why I love it. It starts with this like Egyptian puppet god who is sending
Ooh.
his minions to get back the secret of animation or something like that, and it takes place on a college campus during like spring break or something. So it's peak cheese pretty much. There's these little like totemic evil puppet things that are trying to kill the descendant of the original puppet master and his dolls. It's stupid. It's fun. I enjoy the heck out of this. And I was debating whether or not to put it on my honorable mentions, but I don't know. I have a blast every time I watch this one.
Thought you were gonna say Ghoulies 3. Ghoulies go to college.
Similar vein, but no.
Okay, fair enough. All right, my next honorable mention is also it's a decent movie. I recognize it's not high fashion here when it comes to the horror world, but it is Cloverfield. This is a movie I enjoy for a couple reasons. Number one, it introduced the audiences here to a giant kaiju-like monster in the United States, which we don't have a lot of in our history and culture here. We have like King Kong and end of list. Whatever is in Pacific Rim, I guess maybe counts also a little bit. I'm not sure, but anyway. But I like that about the movie. I also love that this one kind of uses these like tantalizing camera shots to never let you fully see what that creature looked like until really late in the movie. The story itself with like the humans in this movie, hit or miss, not so great. But another thing that was unique about this movie that I loved was there's one scene where in a flashback they're on I believe a Ferris wheel at like Coney Island or something, and in the background scene you see real quick, it's like 2 frames long. Yeah, you know what I'm talking about. Something splashes down in the water, and it led to this whole like viral marketing. You could go down the rabbit hole with this thing with like some product named Slusho, and there was like this theory about something that landed in the ocean that awakened these creatures, or maybe it mutated these creatures or something, and there was like all these fake websites set up, and it was just like total promo gimmicky type stuff, which I am totally always into. And I enjoyed this movie for that reason.
Okay. Completely flip side of things is one that did not have a very large budget, and it was actually pretty much shoestring as far as I could tell. But the way they approached the source material and adapted it made all the difference. The 2005 version of The Call of Cthulhu, which is shot in black and white in the style of a silent film. So there's like, the text cards that pop up when someone says something and all that. And you could just sitting through this, you can tell it's a labor of love. Like the people involved, they cared about the story. They cared about trying to portray it as best they could with the funds they had. And it's not a technical marvel by any means, but holy crap, is it entertaining to watch if you like the Cthulhu mythos. And yeah, just a very, despite how widely known Lovecraft's work is these days, I think this film is pretty, unknown, flies under the radar a lot. And it's one that I think everyone should at least give a shot because it's not very long, and it's really an enjoyable film.
And it's called what again?
The Call of Cthulhu.
Call of Cthulhu. Cthulhu.
But yeah,
right.
It's like maybe an hour and some change. So it's a quick watch, even if you don't end up liking it.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Okay, my second to last honorable mention here is another classic that you're going to see at the top of a lot of different kinds of lists. This is The Sixth Sense, which when came out, I loved the ending. This was, other than we won't count Stuart Little 2, I think the world's first look at M. Night Shyamalan. Shyamalama Ding Dong. And this was this was really well acted with Bruce Willis and Haley Joel Osment at the time. And when that first shock came of like, I see dead people, and then like we learned that Bruce Willis had died, and like it was this whole thing. Fantastic movie, fantastic twist. I feel like Shyamalan in particular has tried to replicate the twist ending several times himself, usually to lesser and lesser success. But it was really cool. The reason this is not on my top 15 is there becomes a point here where like the kid outright knows that he's helping the ghosts, and then it kind of goes from like scary tense movie to like there's a lady outside our door whose dog died and I have to help her dog and make her feel peace. And like we went from like there's dead bodies hanging in the school to and here's a ghost over here that I need to help find their missing packet of salt or something. So it lost a little bit, but I still appreciate what it did.
That's fair. Okay, which brings me to my last honorable mention, and this isn't strictly a horror flick, but it does have horror elements. I'm mainly including it because it's a cyberpunk movie done right. It's called Split Second, 1992, starring, of all people, Rutger Hauer. Now, I hesitate to call it a good movie. Like, a lot of the line deliveries are kind of schlocky, and there's this underlying sense of, low budgetness to it all. But the world they build up around it, it feels real. The overall plot is sort of a supernatural murder mystery kind of thing, where it's
that.
it's cyberpunk, but there's like demonology involved, and possibly like genetic mutations and things. There's a lot of layers to what is really kind of a schlocky futuristic action flick. But I rewatched it again for the first time a week or two ago, and I actually really enjoyed it because I hadn't seen it before that since like maybe when did it come out? 1993. I probably saw it like 1998 or so the last time, and yeah, it's if you like big dumb action flicks that have a little bit more under the surface. Split Second is a solid recommendation. It's fun. It's got that horror element. It's got some decent action and a good setting.
I've never heard of that one.
Yeah, I stumbled across it just looking through some like top 20 obscure action flicks list or something like that. I'm like, is this what I think it is? So I dug it up. I watched it on like Tubi or something like that, and yeah, it holds up.
All right. My final honorable mention here is actually one of the ones on Tony's list that he submitted to us. And this is the movie. Actually, it might be in some ways probably Karen's most distressing movie she's ever watched as well. I've heard her say multiple times. This is the movie Funny Games, which I do see Tony has on his list as well here. But briefly, this one I don't have a fault with, or it's not on here for kitschy marketing, but essentially this is just the story of a family who goes to like a summer vacation home, happens to see two neighbors like playing golf in the front yard, and they come over to like, I forget, borrow eggs or something, and essentially take this family hostage and just like torture them for days. And the family, the part that creeps her out, I know, and I really enjoyed about the movie also, is the family makes every possible decision that you would make. Whenever you watch a scary movie, you're like, this character's dumb. Like, why would you split up? Why would you do this? Why would you do that? And this family, like, literally, if you were in all of those moment-to-moment situations, it's like, pause the movie. What would you do? And you'd be like, well, I'd rock the chair and break the leg and take the knife off the counter. They do that in this movie. Everything you think of, they do. And these guys already have, like, thought of the way to counter what you're going to do. And it's just terrifying to think, like she always says, like, everything I would try to get out of the situation wouldn't work. I'd be dead. Like, it is an unusual movie. There's a newer cover I see with like Naomi Watts' face and like her crying, I think is like the new cover. But the old cover was just like, I think the two guys with like golf clubs or something, like just you wouldn't even have guessed it was a horror movie at first until you picked it up. But it is deeply distressing. It really is, to be like, this could happen to you. And if it did, you're not going to have a chance to get out of it. So,
well, okay.
is my last honorable mention.
All right. Which I
Shall
guess
we
brings us.
kick off the big show?
Sure.
Well, it's the big show.
So you want me to go first, or should you?
Um, don't care.
Okay.
Whichever.
Well, we'll keep up the back and forth, I guess.
Okay.
All right. So my number 15 is
15.
uh potentially a controversial pick, but the first Silent Hill movie.
Mm.
Now, I added this to the list for a couple of reasons. First, it's probably the best video game to movie adaptation I've ever seen. And they actually tried to do it right. They tried to capture the atmosphere of the games. They tried to at least do justice to the source material instead of just having it be a cash grab. And beyond that, it's a fairly solid horror movie on its own. It does have flaws, but in general, there are moments that are really tense. There's some really great camera work. The creatures are creepy. The
Yeah.
overall atmosphere is pretty decent, and
Yeah.
so those two things together made me want to add this on my list somewhere. And again, a lot of people would disagree with me on this one, but as a fan of the series in general, yeah, I think they really poured a lot of heart and soul into this adaptation.
No, that's
But,
a really good choice. I didn't think of that movie. That one I really like. Everything you said about it was a huge positive. I don't know the games well enough that when they got to like the final scene where there was like all the shit happening,
mm,
I was like, I don't fully understand the plot well enough to know who's being sacrificed because who's so and so and so and so so and so. But
mhm.
even without all that stripped out of it, it was a damn creepy movie with the nurses and Pyramid Head and the town and great effects. And yeah, it's a good choice.
Thank you.
I'll compliment you now in case I shit on you later. So,
Oh, it'll happen.
oh, all right. My number 15, kicking off my list, is from 1991, and I put the directors on these. This is Jonathan Demme. It's the classic Silence of the Lambs, which
Mm.
is just start to finish a solid movie. Introduced us. Well, did it introduce us to Hannibal Lecter? They had Mindhunter first, I think, right?
Ooh, I think
Which
so.
I
Yeah.
don't know if he was in that or not, but I don't think it was Anthony Hopkins if it was.
Yeah. Well, I
My
got IMDb in the background here. Let's
see
take a
here.
look here.
But anyway, this is a pretty solid movie. I've shown this actually in a creative writing class before, and we went kind of down the rabbit hole of like trying to figure out the behind the message of what's happening here, the characters, and really memorable characters too. Clarice, obviously, and Hannibal, and then Buffalo Bill also is kind of like the third axle of the weird plot that takes place and the mystery they're trying to solve. But memorable scenes. I mean, the hole and the I can smell your as they're in the all the jails and all the things like this and the discovery she finds in like the warehouse and like it's just it's solid all the way around. It's not outright horror, but it's definitely psychological more than anything else and a pretty solid movie, I would say.
Fair choice. Yeah, I that one only didn't make my list because I do consider it to be more of a thriller than a straight up horror flick. But yeah, very good movie all the same. Um, okay, my number 14, 1982's Poltergeist.
Mm.
Another one I saw when I was pretty young, and this one actually kept me up a few nights because and it is also one of the movies that really cemented my love of horror as a genre because the stuff I said at the beginning, not quite ever knowing what to expect from a solid horror movie, this film exemplifies that. There's a tree that eats a little boy. There's a closet that opens up to this weird fleshy, portal to who knows where. There's, your standard ghost. There's everything in the kitchen sink in this. And I just loved the approach. I loved never knowing what was around the next corner. Yeah, it's just a really great film with incredible effects for the time. Um, so yeah, this one has stuck with me for all these years, and there's a reason why. It's just really well put together. The twists, explaining the haunting at the end, which I'm not going to spoil a 40-year-old movie, but
It's
it's
okay.
well, okay, sure. The whole you move the headstones, but you left the bodies. That whole thing. It's just like that was it had added a nice kind of gothic flair to the whole thing, where it worked in like classic. You don't mess with the Sleeping Dead kind of feel. But yeah, just really solid film all around. And yeah, I'd watch this movie again in a heartbeat.
I have watched this one more recently, again, like last several years with the kids, and I can't do it. It's.
Oh,
I tried. I don't know what it is about it. It just seems like a stale movie. I don't know why. It's just like just shows its age or what. But I'll have some on mine that are the same way. So
that's fair.
I recognize its place. I know it was on a lot of the lists I saw. Um, Going through, it's considered a classic and everything as well, but
Okay.
not in my consideration. But this next one may not be one you enjoy. So I wanted to put at least one Stephen King adaptation on my top 15, just because of his influence and prominence in the genre, not film necessarily, although some of his more recent ones, I guess, are pretty good.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I chose 1408 for this one, which is not one of his biggest movies, nor biggest, well, it's not even a novel, it's just a short story, but essentially, this probably has bonus points in my eyes because it has John Cusack as the star, and I'm a sucker for John Cusack, even though I recognize he's not a good actor for some reason. I just like his stuff. But simple premise here. He's like an aspiring writer who takes the challenge of hearing about this more or less haunted room in a hotel, 1408, and he demands the key from Samuel L. Jackson because he's going to stay the night there for that night. I just like that insanity happens, and the slow build on this one's really good with like the alarm clocks going crazy or like these other things, but pretty soon there's like fire and he's freezing and like there's people jumping out of his window onto the street and like it just goes off the rails. And I think like any good ghost story, you're kind of wondering like how much of this is real, how much of this is in his mind. Is he broken? Has the room broke him? Has, you know, his own imagination broken him? So it's a really fun one, 1408. Side note on that one to our friend Dave, in case he ever listens to this episode, the house at the end of his road is numbered 1408, and I can't drive past it without thinking of this movie every time I drive past that.
Okay, that's cool.
So,
Okay, my number 13 slot is one that I'll be amazed if you or really any of our listeners has ever heard of. It's one I stumbled across actually kind of at random, looking through, I think it was the Tubi app, just their horror section. It's one called Vivarium from 2019. Now, this one is a little different. So it starts with this young couple looking to buy their first house. So they're going to different real estate agents. They haven't found anything that they're really sure that they want.
what, with
And
these interest rates?
2019 was a simpler time. Um, but so they eventually end up in this little kind of hole in the wall real estate agent's place. And right off the bat, something seems off about this guy. It's like he's Elon Musk, basically. He's like a weird fake human kind of thing that's trying to act like a person. But he eventually manages to sort of talk slash strong arm them into going to see one of their houses, which is in this sprawling subdivision where everything looks the same. Like, you know, it's street after street of just cookie cutter, you know, suburban houses. So they get out, they go to look through, you know, one of the houses, and he leaves them in one of the rooms. And when they leave that room, he's gone. And they're like, well, what the hell? Well, okay, fine, whatever. We saw it, we'll leave. So they get in their car and they drive and they drive and they drive. And it's always just the same rows of houses. No matter which streets they turn down, no matter which way they go, they're trapped in this labyrinth, for lack of a better term, of like suburban hell. There's no other people that they can see. It's just this same landscape as far as the eye can see. So night falls and they're like, well, we got to do something. We may as well sleep in the house that he showed us. So they find their way back to it. And the next morning they open the door and they see a basket with a baby in it with a note saying, raise the child and you can leave. And things get really freaking weird from that point onwards.
What the heck?
Yeah, it's one of the most unique horror films I've seen in a long time, and one I have never seen mentioned anywhere. So Tubi is a free app. I think the film is probably still on there. If you have an hour and a half, 2 hours to kill, I'd recommend it. It's really disturbing at times. There's some really interesting elements to it. and I don't really want to spoil much else.
Hmm.
So, yeah, it's an undiscovered gem, and I'm very happy I just kind of tripped over it.
Give us the name again. Vivarium.
Vivarium, or I'm not sure how it's pronounced, but Vivarium.
Okay. Yeah, good one. I never heard of that. Sounds a little bit like what's the House of Leaves? Is that the book?
A little bit, but different.
They what was the movie? That came out as a movie too, wasn't it? What was the big Kevin Bacon movie that came out? Or is it a TV show or a movie they put out that was like the same premise they
Oh,
stole from that?
I do vaguely remember hearing about that, but I don't
I don't know
quite
what happened to that.
remember.
I was excited to watch that and then I totally fell off my radar. Anyway.
Yeah, but yeah.
Okay. My what are we on here? 13 is from 2016 by the director David Sandberg. And this is again not a great movie. So why is it on my list? Let me tell you, this is Lights Out. That's right. Right now,
Oh,
Justin's judging me silently.
you're going.
This is Lights Out. This is again, like I said, it's not a fantastic movie, but it has. Well, let me tell you why it's a stupid movie first. It's a stupid movie because there's this ridiculous backstory about, or it's actually, I'm spoiling the ending partially here, but there's sort of a reveal where a girl had been like exposed to all of these like light beams and somehow basically was evaporated into being I don't even know what you would say. She can only exist in the dark is the long and short of this. That's the ridiculous part. But here's why it's great. This is great because the one of the most, if not the most common fear people have is the dark. And so this movie, better than any movie I've ever seen, plays upon that fear. And so you could have a character who's in the room with the light on, and when they turn the light off, this creature is able to interact with the world when the light is off. And so you'll see as the viewer, like on the opposite side of the bed behind her, here's this like ghost lady. I don't know what you want to call her, shadow lady. I guess shadow lady's a better term for it. Um, and then she'll flick the light back on and she'll disappear. And then she'll flick the light back off and she'll be up on the bed now, really close to the lady. And you're like, oh God, oh God. But they use this so effectively for different sequences in the movie, like a long hallway shot early in the movie. You know, they like turn a light off and this girl's like squinting, like looking way down this hallway, like, is that somebody down there? And then they like flick the light on, and of course there's nothing there. But then, you know, flick the light off, and then suddenly it's half the distance to you, and you're like, holy shit. But it's just this idea that I don't know any other movie that just has made an entire movie up about the dark. And it's just so cool because it's like just this basic concept of when we turn our lights off, what might actually be out there? Because that's what we're all afraid of. That's why nobody likes the dark to begin with. So again, it's not a great movie, but it has a really, really cool concept, which I did enjoy. So this is called Lights Out. It's my number 13.
Okay, I can respect that. Let's see. So moving on to my number 12, 1998's Ringu, the film that started a phenomenon, one of the films that started a phenomenon. So, known probably to a lot of people for its American adaptation, The Ring. Um, I enjoyed this one when it came out, both versions actually. Uh, just because it's a solid film. It's got some interesting twists and turns. It's really creepy at various points. But in the years since it came out, I've done a lot of reading into Japanese folklore, Japanese mythology, and it really hammers home how well this film captures what is known in Japanese folklore as a yurei. Yurei are essentially angry ghosts. And Sadako, or Samara, if you want the American version, is pretty much the quintessential angry ghost. And the thing that makes these entities so compelling to me is that it's really hard to tell what the hell they want. It might seem obvious, like in the film where they're like, oh well, she was drowned in this well. If we find her body and bury her, then she'll be at peace. No, usually the obvious answer is not the right one when you're dealing with one of these creatures. And the fact that Sadako wanted them to do something completely different and much more insidious, that really encapsulates what these things are all about. They're not nice. They're not going to forgive you. They'll only go away and leave you alone if you do exactly what they want. And it wasn't until years after I saw this that I realized, man, they really hit the nail on the head with portraying one of these things. So yeah, Ringu or The Ring if you prefer not having subtitles, great film.
Yeah, that's a solid pick. The Ring almost made mine. I haven't seen the Japanese version. I've heard it's just ever so slightly better, of course, because source material and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But that's a solid choice. I always admired The Ring as well because it's PG-13, which is not necessarily where you expect good horror to land all the time. So
True.
I was respected for that as well.
Okay.
I was gonna say maybe those. What did you call the Yuri? Is that what you call them?
You're right. Yeah.
Yuri.
Mm-hmm.
Like you have this high opinion of them, but really they're like, oh shit, they dug up my body and buried it. I got to think of something even worse now. All right, you're gonna need to parallel park. No, I don't know something. All right, my number 12 is, boy, I have to check, but this is probably got to be the most recent one on my list. I would think. I don't even know how this ended up in my top, but it did. I did enjoy it quite a bit. This is from 2019. It's a Jordan Peele movie who is kind of, in my mind, taken over M. Night Shyamalan as the guy who keeps cranking out scary, psycho, weird movies now at this point. And this is Us, not This Is Us, the TV show, to be clear, on NBC about the
Horrifying.
family. I tried to sit through a few episodes. It is horrifying. This is just the movie called Us. There we go. This one was unique to me because I may have been a stupid viewer, so take that with a grain of salt, but I didn't catch the twist in this when it happened. And I think that's how the movie is designed to be, but I didn't catch it for sure. So just a short summary of this one. This is like, again, a family goes to like, I don't know if it's Coney Island, but some place like that, little seaside resort, with the little carnival type place to it. And the little girl of the family runs into essentially like a funhouse type place and makes a wrong turn in the funhouse and somehow ends up coming face to face with a girl that looks exactly like her. And you've seen this one, I'm assuming?
I actually haven't, but go
Oh,
ahead.
okay. Well, I'm not gonna spoil. I won't spoil the whole thing for you then. But
Okay.
um, she is like just staring at this other person, and then eventually comes out of the funhouse, and the family finishes their day, and there's like this crazy guy on the beach, which I won't totally spoil what he's there for either. But they just go like, crazy guy with the sign,
Mm-hmm.
like one of the Jesus saves Bible verse type guys,
Mm-hmm.
and eventually they go to like this house they're staying at. And while they're there that night, they are invaded by these home invaders, which look suspiciously like they do. The dad is basically the same size and shape. The mom looks eerily similar. And the two kids, well, they don't look quite as similar. So there's some differences there. But essentially, it's them like trying to stay alive and get away from these beings that are chasing them. And then later in the last like third of the movie, they're going to give you the actual twist on this one, which is the part that I didn't even consider as I was watching this, I'll be honest. And they're going to go down some weird places for this one. Now, I will say part of what their secret plot, I guess, behind this all is doesn't make entire sense to me as far as like how that would actually work in real life. But the concept is pretty cool in this one. I won't say more than that if you haven't seen this. It's worth a watch,
Okay.
Justin. You'd probably enjoy this one.
Okay.
So I'm going to go with Us for my number 12 movie.
Okay. And that does again highlight some of my shortcomings in modern horror. It's very scattershot what I've seen there, but that is one I'll definitely have to check out. Okay. That brings us to number 11. Mine is Saw, the first one. Which some might argue is more of a thriller, but I think it has enough creepy elements that it counts as a horror movie. Also, the fact that they released each one around Halloween, seems to fit there too. But
yeah,
say what you will about the series as a whole, the first one I do think is a very tight, very intriguing, just thriller slash horror flick about people having to come to terms with the wrongs in their life in order to keep living. And it's it was something where I didn't quite know what to expect going in. And even after having watched I enjoy all the twists and turns enough that I would watch it again. It's not a flawless movie by any means, but it does have some really interesting developments. It sets up what at the time at least was a pretty intriguing serial killer, Jigsaw, who
Hmm.
himself was dying of cancer, so he was trying to, in his weird, twisted way, make people better before he himself died because he couldn't make himself better. There's a lot of like psychological stuff going on there,
Yeah.
but it does a lot with some very limited locations and a very fairly minimalistic plot, and yet it manages to be very watchable even today, I would argue.
Yeah, it's a great choice.
Thanks.
That's a great choice. Did I write that down? I did. Okay. My number 11 is so those the four below this, I would say my 12 through 15 were probably a little weaker on my lovability scale, but we're getting up to the top ones here with number 11 now to me. So my number 11 is also on Fontana's list. This is by director Neil Marshall, who I don't really know, but maybe that name rings a bell with you. This is from 2005, and this is called The Descent, which I see he does have up here on his. So, in essence, and it's been a long time since I've seen this, but The Descent has, some plot line about how these five women get together for celebrating something or a reunion or XYZ, and they're going basically splunking down into caves as their activity of choice, which they find, of course, that there are these inhabiting creatures down in this cave who, as it turns out, you won't believe this, don't like humans very much. Well, that's not true. They do with a little ketchup. But anyway, it's basically the story about how they're trying to stay alive in the cave from these creatures that live in there. Fantastic use of claustrophobic settings, fantastic use of light, which is like literally life to them because if they can't see what's around them, then they're going to die. But it's just like a survival story of these five women. So props to them for number one, the all-female cast I thought was cool. And then also number two, just I don't know if I've seen a lot of movies that are like entirely in a cave, to be quite honest. I mean, they're featured in some I can think of maybe, but not as like the main setting where they're there the whole movie. So
Yeah.
it's got some spooky parts to it. Good use of lighting, and again, like I said, so this is The Descent, which was also on Fontana's list here.
Okay. Excellent choice. It's one I'm kind of kicking myself for having forgotten about
Mm.
because I also haven't seen it in a really long time, but I do remember really enjoying it the last time I did. Um, okay, brings us to the start of the top 10.
Yes.
And my number 10 pick is now, I'm not normally a Stephen King fan at all.
Ooh.
Like, there's just something about his work that usually doesn't strike a chord with me. I'm not sure if it's the fact that he focuses a lot on serial killers or, things like that, but this one is an exception. And it's The Mist from 2007, which I see is also
Oh.
on Tony's list here. Um,
Okay.
Now, The Mist, it takes a much more otherworldly, sort of supernatural take to say something like Misery or even The Shining. It's this little town out in the mountains that one day this mist just rolls in and blankets the entire town. You can't see more than like 5 feet in front of your face, and there are things that come along with the mist. And most of the story focuses on this group of characters who are trapped in this convenience store,
Mhm.
and it's about how their allegiances, develop and break down, and how their individual like fears and psychoses rise to the surface and eventually tear them apart. Uh, it does have that sort of who are the real monsters here underlying message, but the actual monsters on display are really cool. They were, well animated. They were creative. And I'm not going to spoil it, but that ending. Uh,
It's uplifting though, right?
oh, it's butterflies and rainbows. Um, but yeah, it is. I'll just say it's harrowing and it's powerful. A lot of people hate it, the
Yep.
ending that is, but
Yeah.
I personally find that it really it sent a message. It's not a pleasant message, but it really fit with the overall film.
Mm,
So it's very bleak. Know that going in, but it is my favorite Stephen King movie.
interesting. Yeah, the ending. I don't know if the ending kept it off my list in particular or what. Should also point out if you've read this short story, there's a different ending.
Hmm.
Just leave
Yeah,
it at that, I
it's
guess. We'll leave it at that, I guess.
that's fair. That's fair.
I was going to comment on that further, but I guess we'll leave it at that.
Yeah.
Okay, my number 10 movie is one that a lot of people probably would not put in their top lists, I would guess. Something from 2003, and it is House of a Thousand Corpses by Rob Zombie. I chose this one for several reasons. Number one, I thought kind of in the similar vein to like a Texas Chainsaw Massacre, kind of created this family of crazy killers, but like each member of the family had their own little personality to them and kind of made them unique to the other members in the family. Where we get Captain Spaulding, who's not technically part of the family, but runs like a little gas station / murder ride on the side / chicken cooking business. Yeah, you heard that right if you haven't seen this before. And then we have like baby Firefly, who's just like psycho crazy, and Dr. Satan is in this movie, who's like this weird, deformed operating doctor, and there's Tiny and Mama, and then probably the scariest / most symbolically what do I want to say here? Like maybe the symbol of this first movie is actually Otis Firefly, who is played by Bill Moseley, and is just like this guy who is a regular human being, but like has the worst tendencies you could think of as human characteristics. He's just a psychopath. He kills for fun. Like it's not even pleasure to him. I think it's just like something to occupy time, but he does enjoy like deforming people and just hurting people in like the weirdest ways. So I do think that was all an interesting cast. I felt like I'm probably wrong because again, I may have fallen off horror films a little bit here, but I felt like this really was like an homage to the 80s teen slashers, which were really prominent then. And I hadn't seen a lot of heading back into this in 2003. So it's kind of a throwback to that as well. And I was actually pretty intrigued to see Rob Zombie direct a movie, period, at that point, because I think this was the first, if I recall, is before all the Halloweens and his sequels and stuff.
Okay. Yeah.
And he was only really known for like music videos and like weird fashion statements that he himself was doing. So, and there's definitely like a scene here or there where it feels like you're watching some kind of, acid trip music video itself, but it's all pretty fun. And shout out to Ryan Wilson, who is in this movie as Fish Boy. So for all the Office fans out there, you'll get to see a whole new light of our friend Dwight.
Okay. Solid choice. Let's see. Number 9. Another one I will be surprised if anyone else has heard of. A not quite zombie movie called Mulberry Street. I say not quite because it has all the hallmarks of a zombie flick. The isolation, the city that isn't safe, the survivors banding together. But what they're banding together against they aren't technically zombies. I don't necessarily want to spoil exactly what they are because it's probably the weakest part of the film. But the shell around that is what really makes this one for me because it takes its time. It builds up, introducing you to all the characters and actually making you care about them, which is a rarity for a lot of horror films.
Yeah.
By the time the shit really hits the fan, I really didn't want to see any of these people get hurt or die. I actually cared about their fates. I wanted to see them succeed, and anytime one of them did get killed, it made me sad because they were such well-rounded characters that it felt like you wanted to root for you wanted to root for them. So if you like zombie flicks and you don't mind a bit of a kind of hokey take to the actual monsters themselves, the heart of this movie is really strong. Again, it's from 2010. You can probably still find it out there somewhere. So if you can, I would recommend it. It's a good flick.
This is Mulberry Street.
Yes.
Is this? It's got to be purposely named after the Dr. Seuss book, right? Has to be.
I never thought of that, but
Some guys like down the road, like watching the zombies, like, well, I think I saw it on Mulberry Street.
but
Wouldn't happen on Oak Street, but
no, Elmo. Ooh, you don't want to go down that street.
oh, you don't want to go down Elm Street. No, not that one. All right, sweet. That sounds like a fun one. My number 9 is a classic. It is 1960s Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho, which, I mean, what hasn't been said about this movie, but I'll just mention why I put it in my top 10 here. Number 1, they just do a fantastic job of storytelling from the Norman Bates part of the story, I will say. The rest of the story seems like maybe we didn't need as much as we needed of the story, with like the leaving town and stealing money and all these things. But that does provide some red herrings later on, which I do also appreciate about the movie. So, things about this, let's see. So, first of all, just the character of the mother that was kept away from the audience for so much of the movie and was kind of hinted at in the shadow in the shower scene, which of course is so famous. I don't know. I was trying to think, like, if it's not the most known scene in horror or all of cinema, it has to be close.
Yeah.
This is a scene that has definitely transcended this genre, if you want to call this horror, which I would consider it that. Other cool things about this, just the idea of like a cross-dressing killer. I don't know that was prominent in 1960. That seemed a little ahead of its time. So there's that. The shot at the end of the movie with Anthony Perkins when he's in jail and they like superimpose the skull shot on him, which I've talked to people who've watched the movie and they're like, that's not in there. And I'm like, yeah, it is. Go back and watch. And like, it's creepy. So kind of like a little special effect type thing. I mentioned the red herring with the money. I did love that. Like the audience probably assumes like Norman Bates is going to steal the money that I forget the actual character's name now, had stolen from her work, but that was in the trunk of the car, just goes down in the swamp. It's just like a dead plot device. Like you thought that's where it was going, but it's not. And then I don't know that today's audiences would necessarily know this as much, but when this movie came out in 1960, another thing that made it really big in the news was the main star of the movie was Janet Leigh, who dies in the movie in the shower scene famously, and she was like the big name of the movie. You know, the rest of these people that were in the movie were not budding movie stars at that point. She was who people would know from the poster. Her name's in the big credit, and she dies halfway through the movie. So if I was in the theater watching this, I'd be like, what the hell? Like, it's a ballsy move. You know, we've seen it in more recent films as well. Like, I'm thinking notably of like Drew Barrymore and Scream and some other things where like, here's this big star and nope, they're dead. And you're like, wait, what the hell's the rest of this movie about then? And Psycho definitely is kind of like almost 2 films. It's like her to her death and then the second part with the detective and the sister trying to figure out what happened there. So fantastic movie. I can't imagine anybody out there hasn't seen it yet, but if you haven't, check out Psycho, Hitchcock. Great movie.
Agreed. Yeah, excellent choice. It didn't make my list because it's a bit too, like, the stakes are a bit too mundane. I like my horror a bit weirder. Even when it comes to things like a slasher or a serial killer. Which brings me to my number 8 pick, Wes Craven's New Nightmare. So of the big 3, Halloween, Friday the 13th, Nightmare on Elm Street, I've always liked Nightmare on Elm Street best because it did so much outside the box. You got Freddy Krueger, who can, if you're asleep, he can do anything to you. And that's pretty much. But Wes for those of you at home, there were eyebrow wiggles. But Wes Craven's New Nightmare, 1994, I do believe was the only sequel that was actually directed by Craven himself, and it shows. Because he already kind of took an outside the box approach to the first movie, and this one is even a further step beyond that, where it's a very meta approach to everything, where it takes place in a world where Nightmare on Elm Street is just a movie. Yeah, it's a popular movie and series and everything, but in this world, it starts to transcend its cinematic nature and Freddy starts coming out and actually killing people in this fictional world that is supposed to be kind of our world, which is the normal world. It really plays with a lot of expectations and a lot of tropes, and just it was one of the first exposures I had to that whole meta narrative concept, and I think it's really well done. Some great scares, some really good effects. It's if you haven't seen it, because it was, I think, like the seventh film in the franchise, I would definitely recommend giving it a watch, because it really brings it back to the horror feel, whereas a lot of the in-between films they got kind of goofy after a while.
Okay.
So Wes Craven's New Nightmare.
Fair enough. Okay. Yeah, I probably haven't seen that one because, like you said, it was so far down the franchise, I probably just never gave it a shot. But in a perfect world where I had unlimited time, I would go back and watch all of these movies. Sounds fantastic. Okay, my number 8. Now I think I'm going to pre-say Justin's not going to appreciate this being on a top 15 horror film list. And I don't think Mr. Fontana has chosen this one either, mostly because it's 75% comedy and only 25% horror. But this is from 2004, Edgar Wright, Shaun of the Dead, which several sites I was on had it listed as a horror comedy. So I was like, oh, it does have the word right there. So I'm gonna count this one. But if anybody hasn't seen this one before, this is essentially the comedy take on the zombie genre with Simon Pegg and what's his name, Nick Frost, is that his name?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, in England, and they have a zombie invasion, and of course they are what's my word I'm looking for here? Not unknown, not unwilling. The people you would not expect.
Unlikely.
Thank you. Geez, unlikely. The unlikely heroes of the day. That was the zombie fighters, I guess, in this one. So this is just a fun one. You got to put yourself back in 2004 at the time as well. Like the zombie genre was like super big. Probably in its, like 3-4 years, it's probably around, but the zombies were everywhere at that point. We kind of go through these phases with like vampires or zombies or whatever it's going to be. Endlessly quotable movie. It's just fantastic. The dialogue in here, very funny. It is part of a larger associated trilogy, I guess, with Hot Fuzz and the
World's End.
World's End, thank you.
Yeah.
Which to me they've always went down from the first movie, but I know other people do like Hot Fuzz better here and there. But just funny, great bits like the part where they have to get past the intersection filled with zombies, and they just kind of like get out their best zombie walk and shuffle through while groaning with their head cocked to the side. And then I actually thought the intro to this movie is very telling as well. If you don't recall that, it's like Simon Pegg's character, Sean, getting up and like so tired that he needs his coffee and like driving to work and like seeing like how we all really do just go through the same motions every day, not unlike a zombie. We are like mindless creatures driven by habit and, our work that we're required to do. So I think there's some social commentary to be had in here as well. But just great things about like, throwing records at the zombies to try to keep them away. And at the end, spoiler alert, I'll spoil this one, Nick Frost character turns into a zombie, but Sean still has him tied up, and they're like, I think playing Sega together at the end of the movie or something.
So, yeah, it's like a PS2 or something.
Yeah, something like that. It's funny, but Shaun of the Dead, there we go. That's kind of a cheater entry, but there it is.
It is a great movie. Not one that made my list because I was trying to focus more on like straight up horror, but it's kind of fascinating in a way because that is sort of a modern day take on the old like Abbott and Costello meet Frankenstein kind of things.
I can see that.
Yeah. And also a fun film, not quite as quotable or as memorable as Hot Fuzz as Shaun of the Dead, but the horror comedy subgenre has been around for a pretty long time.
Yeah.
And, it's good to see that it's still alive and kicking, so to speak. On a complete opposite end of the spectrum is my number 7 pick, A Tale of Two Sisters, a 2003 Korean film, actually. And this one, if I say too much about it, it would be spoiling it. But I'll in broad strokes, it is about a pair of sisters living with their stepmother, who, in traditional like horror fashion, is not a very nice person. But she's not. It's not like she's just mean to them. She has something wrong with her, and
Hmm.
as she begins to act more and more erratically, other things start happening in the background, and it's a really psychological kind of take on what ends up being a ghost story. I'll say that.
Hmm.
And it can be very disturbing at parts, like some of the things that happen. But it is a very engaging film. Like it never quite lets up once it starts actually kicking into high gear. So if you don't mind subtitles and you are okay being with like a more unnerving sort of horror versus just straight up jump scares and whatnot, A Tale of Two Sisters is a very solid pick.
Nice. Good choice. Don't know it, but it sounds like a fun movie.
Yeah.
Okay, my number 7 is okay, so a long time ago somebody said like, what are your favorite scary movies? I always had 3 that came to mind right away. Only one of them sadly made my countdown. The 2 that I did not put on here, even as honorable mentions, are In the Mouth of Madness and Event Horizon, both of which I love for different reasons. Both have Sam Neill, so maybe that has
Mhm.
some weird thing in there. But anyway, the third one I did put on my list, and I ranked it at number 7. This is 1999's William Malone as the director, The House on Haunted Hill.
Okay.
All right. So this has several things I love. It's a murder mystery, it's a haunted setting, it's a game of death, and you question everything the whole movie. So what is real? What is not? It's this birthday party that a man throws for his wife at an insane asylum, of course, an old abandoned insane asylum, which PS still has a lot of the old contraptions in it that they had used on the let's call them not prisoners but patients, I guess, back in the day. Yeah, exactly. And this is just a fun one for all the twists and turns and like who is actually dead and who is not, and what is the ghosts or the asylum, or what is the husband that had planned things, or what is actually happening to someone actually shoot someone else. Because the idea here, I think, is he wanted to get someone scared enough to shoot his wife so that he could get out of the marriage. The very unique marriage here in this one.
Mhm.
Um, this is also a super fun one because there's the character that Jeffrey Rush plays is essentially just a caricature of Vincent Price, who is in the original version of this. He basically doesn't play Vincent Price's character. He basically plays Vincent Price himself, which I loved actually because I'm a big Vincent Price fan. He was my Funko Pop of the week in class this week. So, um, additional things about this totally 90s cast we have here: Ali Larder, Taye Diggs, Bridget Wilson, who is also famously known as Billy Madison's teacher that he has the hots for. And my favorite part of the movie, Famke Janssen, who is she is nice, very, very, very attractive woman. If there's a downside to this, it is because the monster, and I will spoil this, I guess, if you haven't seen this a little bit, but the end, like the essence of the asylum or whatever you want to say, comes out, and it's kind of like this blobby looking smoke cloud type monster that's chasing some of the characters through the house, and it just doesn't look that intimidating. I'm sure it's deadly and all, but it just doesn't look like it would be scary. And so loses a little bit for that. There's like $1 million game that they're playing and things of that nature as well. But it's all good. I want to say too, and I could be wrong on this. Correct me if you've ever heard this, but I believe when this old version of this came out, this was back in the like 60s when they were doing the
Yeah.
crazy films, late 50s, early 60s, and I think this is the film where they actually rigged the movie theaters with a skeleton on the ceiling. And at one point in the
I think
film,
so.
it swooped down over the audience, I guess. But anyway, this is a really fun one for a lot of reasons. It's a fun cast. It's just a good questioning guesser what's going on, but also some very, very violent and vicious deaths in this one. This is House on a Haunted Hill, 1999 version.
Okay. The original also a classic, but a solid pick,
Yes.
definitely. Yeah,
Original's also good. Just some of the effects don't hold up quite as well today, but
it's true.
a
But
good
they did what
movie.
they could.
Yes.
Um, okay, so it moves us up to number six. My pick for this one is the original Hellraiser, 1987.
Mm.
I know there's been a lot of buzz about like a reboot or like a remake of it that's coming out soon or might already be out. I'm not
I think it's out
100%
already.
sure. Okay, but yeah, so the series has been getting a lot of buzz because of that. But to me, the original is, well, I haven't seen the new one yet, so it might be better, but the original is hard to beat because it's just such a weird and different take to horror. It's much more visceral, I guess you could say. Where my main problem with things like, say, American Horror Story is a lot of it seems to be like, oh, they're doing weird kinky sex stuff and it's scary, and usually the end it's like, no, it's not. It's just weird kinky sex stuff. Hellraiser makes some of that very uncomfortable. I mean, the whole thing with Pinhead and the Cenobites is like there's no division between pleasure and pain. There's like, in the mind, once you've transcended this frail fleshy sack, you are, you can experience things, emotions, feelings you never, would have dreamed of, and it's really dark. It's really freaky, and the underlying plot, with all the characters involved, which I don't want to spoil. I mean, it's an old movie, but it's still worth experiencing. It gets very uncomfortable at times, but it's really well put together.
Mm.
And even in a cinematic fashion, there's a lot of interesting things in the background, like symbolism I didn't pick up on until years later, or like just shapes that are really suggestive of certain things that I didn't notice until later on. Like one of the early shots is there, the family is in the car driving across a bridge, and there's a scene where the camera's pointed upwards, and the sort of V shape to the struts of the bridge look very much like a woman's spread legs. I mean, there's all sorts of this stuff that like worked into the background of the film,
Wow.
and on an unconscious level, I think that really works to help add to the unsettling feeling of everything that's going on. Um, Plus, it gave us Pinhead and the various Cenobites, which are weird, creepy, iconic figures.
Yeah,
So just
definitely.
a stand-up, solid horror flick, even all these years later.
That's it. Still holds up really well, huh?
Mm-hmm.
See, I need time to watch all this. This is good. I don't know. I know I've seen some Hellraisers. I don't even know which ones though. I couldn't even tell if it was the first one or not.
The first
Um,
two are good. After that, it really goes downhill quick.
okay. We used to watch one every once in a while at my friend's house when we were probably way too young to watch them as well. But I couldn't tell you which ones we had seen though. But
Fair.
classic choice. All right, my number six. Oh, it finally happened, ladies and gents. It's our first movie we have in common.
Hey,
Yeah,
I knew it had to happen eventually.
it had to happen eventually. This is, correct me if you've seen this movie before, because if you have seen it, you know it's called Saw. Ha ha! See what I did there?
Oh,
This is Saw from 2004. Justin already mentioned this one, but this is one that I don't know that I have watched in a long time. I probably watched it once or twice originally. I think I have a DVD of it in the basement someplace, but I'm just going to echo a lot of the stuff you said. Like, I was really impressed how they made such use out of like that one underground chamber that they had, which is certainly not where the whole film takes place, but in a way, it's kind of where the whole story takes place,
yeah.
with the two people, and then just, I mean, if you haven't seen this one either, the ending of the movie, just if you didn't see the surprise coming, like, holy shit, that's
So
amazing.
good.
So good. I also put down here, I hadn't seen Cary Elwes in like a very long time until this movie, so he kind
Yeah.
of came back to us in this movie of all movies, I feel like.
It was
I
good
don't
to
know.
see him still getting work. Yeah.
Yeah, it was like he like wasn't a household name, and then I think he did this, and like suddenly that like jump started him back up again, and he's still doing stuff.
Yeah.
Um, I, it is hard to think about how good this movie was and how excited I was to like watch part two when it came out. And I'm pretty sure I probably saw part three, but this is another one of those franchises where like they had a really cool idea and then just did their absolute best to drive this fucker right into the ground with sequel, 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 sequel. And I'm like, I could give a shit less if they make another Saw movie ever at this point. But the original, fantastic. And then also shout out, you mentioned Jigsaw, but we can't forget Billy the Puppet either, who has also become
Mm,
like an iconic horror image at this point.
that is a good point.
So I have Saw just like you do, which has now taken over our lead behind the scenes here.
Nice. All right. Well, interesting. We'll see how the rest of this shakes out. Um,
Takes the
so,
Clown with Bill Murray.
oh, uh, but yes, that means it's time for the top five.
The top five.
All right. So, kicking things off is a more recent film that's, if you haven't seen it, I will say right off the bat, I would highly recommend it. It's called The Ritual. It's on Netflix right now, 2017. And I see, just as an aside, that the director David Bruckner also has directed the new Hellraiser, so that has me automatically interested in seeing
Oh,
that more than I had been. But The Ritual is, at its core, if you want to be reductionist, it's about a bunch of friends that go off on a trip and bad things happen. But it's framed through a very interesting lens. Now, it's told through basically none of this would happen if the people involved hadn't acted the way they did. It's framed through, there's no other way to say it besides toxic masculinity. So,
yeah.
yeah. So it starts with a guy, two of the friends. I think they're already drunk when they head into a convenience store to like pick up more booze. They're just on a run. They're young. They're wild, whatever. And the store gets robbed, or someone whips out a gun and they're holding it at at the clerk's
Yeah.
face. The friend goes up and he's trying to defuse the situation and he gets shot. So the other of the two, he just hides the entire time, and he's well, understandably scared, but he watches his friend bleed out in front of him. Fast forward a bit, after the funeral, and the larger friend group says, well, we got to do something to remember this guy. We have to take that trip backpacking through Europe like we always said we would. We have to honor his memory. We have to do this. So there's some trepidation on the parts of some of them, especially the survivor, but he feels guilted enough that he has to take part in this. So he goes along. They get to Europe, and they're out in the wilderness, and things very quickly start getting weird, where there's clear signs that we should turn back, we should stop, we should end this and just go home. But they don't, because they have to be, they can't puss out. They have to be, the friends, the men that their departed friend would have wanted them to be. So even when they start hallucinating and like weird crap starts happening all around them and people start getting really badly hurt, they keep pressing on because, it's what their friend would have wanted. They can't be, weak. They can't be pussies, for lack of a better term. And it's that mindset that ultimately leads them all to ruin. And it's a solid movie just apart from that, but framed in that way, it really has a strong message. And it's a fantastic film. I don't want to go into exactly what happens to them more than I already have, but if you haven't watched this one, I can't recommend it enough. It's incredible.
This is one I actually have seen as a more recent one. I have not watched many horror films on Netflix, honestly, but this is one I have sat and watched one by myself. So yeah, it's a fun one for sure. Well, not for them, but it's fun to watch. All right, my number 5 is on Mr. Fontana's list. I think I saw up here somewhere. Double checking. Yes, this is from 2002. Sorry, I had to scroll back down there. Danny Boyle's our director, and that might automatically take you to where this is going. It is 28 Days Later, which, if you had me list my favorite scary movies, I don't know that I would think of this one necessarily, but in seeing it on a list, I was like, kind of like you mentioned at the beginning, like a movie that really sticks with you for different reasons. This is one. First of all, it's like a very like British movie. It's like a British scary movie. If that's a weird thing, it's still like totally American English, but like it feels different because it's in England. It's shot in such a way that it looks very gritty. I don't know if they did something to like dirty up the filter on this or what, but like the shots don't look like they're shot for shot the real world. Like it looks like you're looking through the lens of a hellscape, which is basically what this movie is. It's a zombie movie where a person, a la very routinely, wakes up in a hospital and finds out that the world has gone to shit while they're there. And when comes out of it, basically, like London is empty, the whole city is dead. There's trash everywhere. There's the traditional like missing posters all over the place, and there are he doesn't realize for a little while these zombies all over the place, except they're infected with the rage virus in this. They're not zombies technically. They're infected with the rage virus, but again, very, very clearly zombie-like creatures. I don't know. I think there's always some debate over whether this was the first film that had the fast-moving zombies or if it was a different film. I don't know if you know the answer to that off the top of your head or not.
It's the first big film. There may have been a few before this that didn't make as much of a splash, but it's the first one that comes to mind when I think of the fast zombies. Yeah.
I knew there was one that had one of the Dead movies has fast ones also, I believe, but I think that came afterwards.
Yeah.
I'm not even sure which one it was now, but anyway. So all very good. This one really, this would be one Justin would enjoy if it's not on his list. I know he's seen it before, but this is a movie where people are really brought down to like those base instincts and base desires, and it's like survival for some of the people, and for some of the people the characters encounter, it's something a little more carnal, sex, or somebody of the opposite sex, because there's not a lot of women left in the world, it seems like, at this point. And this movie just has a look to it. Also, like you said, this is a very surprising horror film where you do kind of get to know the characters a little bit, and you kind of have some relationships that I actually care about in this movie. I won't spoil what happens to some of those relationships as the movie goes on, but there are things that happen in here which are genuinely very, very, very touching, I would say. So this is 2002's 28 Days Later.
Very strong pick. It's one that, well, I'll just spoil it now, isn't on my list. I have to really be in the right mood for a zombie flick.
You son of a bitch.
But that said, I do really enjoy it. And I think the of the Dead film you were thinking of with the fast zombies might have been War of the Dead.
I don't remember.
Yeah, at any rate, I mean, I do enjoy a good zombie movie here and there, but after a while, a lot of them do kind of hit the same notes. Who are the real monsters? Man is their own his own worst enemy. If only we could trust each other, we'd pull through that sort of thing. And after a while, and it can be done well. I mean, there's a reason these tropes still exist and persist. But I felt like after looking back at this one, just kind of you could say you could look at the plots of any number of zombie films and they hit a lot of the same notes. So that's the only reason that this one wasn't on my list. Good as it is, it didn't really stand out from the pack.
Also, 2-second note, I just remembered, actually, this movie has a really good soundtrack also.
Yes.
And it's not lyrical songs. It is just purely background instrumental, but it's very good for the scenes that they chose.
Yes, definitely. I do agree
just
there.
Remember that.
Okay.
Here we go.
Moving on. My number 4 is also on Tony's list. 1979, the original Alien. And this one should need no introduction, but just in case, it has been described.
Cuba, right?
It has been described as a haunted house movie in space. That, like, when it first came out, that was kind of how reviewers looked at it. And to an extent, that's true, but it is so much more than that. The art design, the feeling of isolation, the fact that there's no help coming and these people are woefully ill-equipped to deal with what they've brought on board, and then underneath it all, the underlying ulterior motives of some of the crew members. It's just, it all comes together in this tense, gripping, unpredictable whole where from what I understand, like, even the cast wasn't able to predict what was going to happen during some of the scenes. Like the chest burster scene, I don't know if this is just like an urban legend, but I've heard that the aside from the guy it happened to, none of the other actors knew what was going to happen in that scene. So the reactions you see are
Wow.
genuine.
That would be
So
interesting.
audience, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong on that, but that's the story I've always heard, and it shows. It is just an incredible film. It's timeless. Alien is a movie I would watch again in a heartbeat. I do like the sequel a bit more, but that's more of an action flick than a horror flick. But in terms of just space-based sci-fi horror, you really can't beat Alien.
Nice. Yeah, that's a solid film. I thought about that for my list as well. Didn't make it, but it is it's a solid and a classic choice as well.
Okay.
Fantastic. P.S. Divergent here, but did you ever play the Alien Isolation game?
Sadly, I have not.
No? Okay.
That's like as a glaring hole in my horror gaming experience. I've heard nothing but good things, though.
Yeah, that kept coming up on when I was doing research for next week's podcast. That kept popping up on websites, and I was like,
Yeah. Well,
okay.
spoilers. What's not going to be on my list then.
Yeah, no doubt. Well, it's not on mine either then. So there you go. All right. My number 4 movie is the oldest movie on my list. Dun dun dun.
Ooh.
Except no dun 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 because it's a silent film. We're going back to 1920 for this one. Robert Wien's Das Cabinet de las Dr. Caligari. The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari is my number 4 film. This is, as I mentioned here, a silent movie. This is a German impressionist movie, which has some of the coolest set designs I've ever seen in a film, where the angles and the shadows and things are oftentimes painted, where you think they actually exist, but they do not, because oftentimes two-dimensional landscapes, but they're tricking you into making think things are much more than they are, three-dimension, and having length and distance and things like that. Fantastic characters in this one, particularly Cesaro, the sleepwalker, the somnambulist, and also Dr. Caligari himself, who have both, again, kind of gone on to transcend this movie and to become icons themselves. The story in this one, if you are not familiar with this, essentially is there is a town that is ravaged by some mysterious killer who turns out to be a sleepwalker who's serving his master, and a lady gets kidnapped, and there's a hero, of course, who's trying to save her. And then I'm just going to spoil this because it's 102 years old. At the very end of all this, we kind of get a frame story that switches out to where this hero is now a patient in an insane asylum, and the doctor, of course, there is, you guessed it, Dr. Caligari. So you have to kind of wonder if this is all real, if this was in his mind. It's pretty inventive for 102 years ago, I have to say, and actually does have some kind of scary moments to it, I would argue, even for a silent film back then. Like Cesaro the Somnambulist is kind of in your face, creepy looking for with the limited makeup, and I wouldn't even say effects, but acting, I guess, they had at the time period. This probably, this is in the advent of early audiences going to watch cinema. This probably would have been fairly terrifying for them at the time, I would think. But
Yeah,
that's my number 4 pick, Cabinet of Dr. Caligari.
great choice. One that I actually forgot about. And actually, as you were talking about it and the set design, it reminded me of another film that I should have included at least as an honorable mention, but
Ah,
them's the breaks. But yeah, that is a very good and sadly lesser known flick at this point. Cabinet of Dr. Caligari is, God, that's one I haven't watched in a really long time, but good choice.
thanks.
Yeah. Okay. My next one is probably going to be carrying on a bit of a theme that you may have noticed. I like horror movies that say something. Going back to like The Ritual, Alien to some extent, but this one is also on Netflix, and I think it is the most recent film on my list. It's from 2021, called No One Gets Out Alive. And this one is kind of weird, but it is in the way that The Ritual was about toxic masculinity. No One Gets Out Alive is about the immigrant experience in the U.S.,
Hmm.
specifically the undocumented immigrant experience in the U.S. The main character is, for lack of a better term, an illegal alien who is just trying to get by. She's trying to look after her mother who's sick, but because she doesn't have her papers, she doesn't have her social security number or her residency, she keeps hopping from job to job. Once they start asking, like, well, where's your proof of identification and whatnot, she ends up, working at like the worst places because they don't ask any questions. She's living in this like rundown tenement, more or less, and having trouble making her bills there. To the point where she starts having to look for another place to live, and ends up finding the worst place she possibly could. Um, it is a home that's ostensibly, at least for underprivileged women, but there's a lot more going on behind the scenes there than there seems, and it's probably not what you think. Um, but it gets into some really, really interesting symbolic, scares and psychology. There's even like a mythological aspect that gets worked in, which might not work for some people, but I feel it actually added a lot to the narrative. I mean, it starts off seeming like, oh, there's just something going bump in the night. There's like this creepy guy who you see in the halls every once in a while, but then he's gone, and it quickly metastasizes into something a lot more intricate and a lot worse than that. It is just a phenomenal film. It goes places that I would not have expected. And it touches on some really difficult subjects, but in a way that the horror element really accentuates rather than denigrates. So if you haven't tried this one, No One Gets Out Alive. It should still be on Netflix. Wholeheartedly recommended.
I don't even know if I've heard of this one, to be honest. No One Gets Out Alive.
Well, yeah, I'm glad to have broadened your horizons a bit.
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely going to keep this list up on my running doc I have here for the podcast, because there's a lot of films on here I've never seen. So,
cool.
That's great. Sounds cool. Okay. Well, this next film I have here is not going to be as deep as that one, but but this I don't have written down, but I think was on your honorable mentions. This is from 1999. Daniel Myrick and Eduardo Sanchez's The Blair Witch Project. It was one of your honorable mentions, correct?
Yes.
All right, so we'll put that on here as well. With
occupying a place of prestige in your list.
It is. Here is why. Let me tell you all about it. So, Justin already hit on this a little bit, but this movie, when it came out in 99, and if you happen to be a younger listener out there, it's hard to have you go back to what it was like in 1999, to be quite honest. This was a time when the internet was like still relatively not as widespread as it is now. This was when word of mouth was definitely, the way that you might hear about a cool movie at the time period. And this movie did a fantastic job with, I don't know if it was the first, but possibly the most successful viral marketing campaign at the time. This is a movie that notoriously was made for very, very little. I think like 2 million or something very small, and grossed like 160 million, if I recall, or something crazy like that. So this is where people started to be like, we can use found footage movies in every other movie because it'll be great. It makes a lot of money. But this was fantastic because for the longest time, up to when the movie came out, and also when it was out, amazingly still, people believed that this was actually a found footage film. Like, this was a documentary, not a movie. And it is shot and presented in such a way that it's kind of tricky to tell that at first glance. And I guess I was even rereading about this. Like, the actors, the three characters, because there's a couple small parts where there's other people, but basically it's just three people. They stayed in their houses hidden, I guess, for weeks to sell the idea that they actually had disappeared out in this woods in Maryland, where this took place at. And like I mentioned, the handycam footage was kind of cool. The brilliant thing about this is it played on so many fears that people have of isolation, being in the woods at night, the darkness, the unknown, supernatural. All of these things are kind of twisted together in this one little tight story of these two guys and girl that go out searching for the legend of the Blair Witch. Dun dun dun. And I think it's fairly safe to talk about this one. I don't know, but just they there's not even a villain. Like they don't even show. There's not even a crappy CGI witch, which probably made the movie better. That they didn't do that, but they build this whole thing up using like their emotions and their breath with the cameras and how fast they're running and the shakiness. I remember made audiences sick. Do you remember that?
Yep.
We went to this is one of the few movies I went to twice. Or maybe it was the first time I saw it, and we got there late, and the only seats left in the theater were the front row.
Oh,
So we had to sit and watch the movie almost vertically. And I remember, like, my friend sat across the aisle from me, and he ran out like he had to go vomit because it was just too much for him to watch this. And it was just fantastically done. So they just made up this like character, made up this legend, and then I guess I won't spoil the actual ending of the movie, but I love the actual final scene of this movie because of like what is implied, not shown in this scene. And like I've watched this with so many people who see that final scene and they're like, I don't get it. Like, what's going on here? And I'm like, are you paying attention to the legend of this at all? Because that is such a creepy ass way to end the movie on, and you didn't even pick up on it because it flew right over your head. But it's so well done, and I just love like everything about this. Like we were so big into this. We used to make the little what are they called? Stickmans or crossman? Stickman, I think, right? The little symbols. We used to like make those out of sticks. Like when we were camping and shit, like we were doing that all over the place. We got big into this. So Brett could probably tell a few stories about this one too, I bet. But Blair Witch Project, that's my number 3.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, all very solid points. It doesn't hold as dear a spot in my heart as it does for you, but it is
basically
still...
just me and the people that were in it. That's
but yeah, it is a very watchable film. And there, as you said, there is a lot to be said for the amount of restraint that they used, especially with regards to the ending, because the human imagination is a very powerful thing, and yeah, if you can poke it enough to fill in the blanks, then that can actually be the most effective thing sometimes.
And actually fairly believable characters too, which I don't think get mentioned enough.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. They felt like real people.
Yeah, they have real dialogue to each other for the most part, and like their decisions they make are somewhat realistic.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah, but yeah, solid choice. Okay. So my number 2. This one, I don't remember if it's on Netflix or I know it's on Shudder, but it might be on Netflix too. But also, oddly enough, a found footage movie, though much more recent. This one's from 2014, and I know in that 15-year span, there's been a lot of found footage films, and a lot of them are not good. This one is an exception. It's called The Taking of Deborah Logan. And the framework for this one, the setup, is that it's a film crew who is trying to bring awareness to mental health issues like degenerative mental conditions. So they put in a request to, document the daily life of Deborah Logan, who is an elderly lady who is seemingly suffering from, some stage of dementia.
Or is she?
Exactly. So the movie starts with them basically just trying to work out the specifics with the next of kin. She finally agrees, and they start filming. They set up cameras in the house to just sort of see, if she sleepwalks, so they can keep an eye on her, that sort of thing. And they very gradually start to notice things aren't right. Like she'll appear across the house where she, when she had just been in her room without showing up on any of the cameras in between. She'll be like, there's one scene where she's like up standing on top of the cupboards in the kitchen with no shot of how she climbed up there. Like just weird, but seemingly explicable things that keep getting darker as the filming rolls on. It does take a supernatural twist, and that's not too much of a spoiler. But it is very well told, very well shot. Where for a good chunk of it, it's a question of how much of this is actually weird or just like equipment malfunctions or what. The only reason this isn't my number 1 is because of some dodgy CGI in one point, and you could argue whether or not the actual explanation we get is a good one. But
Okay.
most of it, the lead up, the atmosphere, the acting, the setup is just exquisitely done. It's a creepy ass film that, as long as the subject matter, mental illness, as long as that doesn't bother you too much, it's one I can recommend without any reservations.
Wow, I've never heard of this one either.
I try.
I'm honestly shocked you have two brand new movies at your top three so far.
Yeah, yeah. Like I said, I don't watch a lot of recent horror, but
Yeah.
a lot of the ones that I have sat down and watched have actually been good. So,
Okay.
which makes me kind of kick myself for not looking at what's more of what's out there in recent years.
Now, does Jess like to watch horror?
Sometimes.
Okay. Is
So
there certain like types that she likes?
she doesn't like ghosts. So there's that.
Huh.
So anything dealing with that sort of thing is probably a no-go, but she seems fine with things like zombies and that sort of stuff. But it really is kind of a movie by movie basis.
Okay.
So yeah.
That's it. Karen doesn't like the kind where there's like a real like stalker or like a real person trying to break into the house type movies.
Hmm.
She can do, any of the supernatural or ghosts or zombies or whatever, but those like the strangers and stuff like that, she does not like that type of film.
Okay. You said she liked funny games though.
I don't know if she likes it, but she would list it as like the top horror movie for her, I think. I think it
Okay.
disturbs her, to be quite honest, but
Fair. Okay.
that's another way to measure a movie's success, I guess.
I could see that.
Um, okay, my number two. Here's an interesting factoid for you.
Mhm.
This was not even on my list yesterday.
Ooh.
I was looking through lists, as I mentioned, and
Mhm.
found two sites that had this again labeled as horror. It's not Shaun of the Dead, so don't worry. I don't know that I would strictly call this horror. It's not a movie I had thought to include on this list as horror, but I don't know what label I would give the movie if not that. Thriller would be the wrong word. Suspense would be the wrong word. So maybe it is horror, I
Okay.
guess. I'm not sure. This is one of my 5 favorite movies of all time, and I am sneaking it on this list right here in the number 2 spot. This is the less popular brother of a film earlier on my list. This is from 2005, and this is The Devil's Rejects by Rob Zombie. Now, I don't know if you would classify this as horror per se. I don't know what else you'd classify it as, though.
Yeah. Other than like the blanket term of grindhouse, but that's
Yeah,
neither here nor there. Yeah.
but anyway, I found a few that listed it as horror. I think even one had like horror comedy, but it's. So let's, if you haven't seen the first movie, House of a Thousand Corpses, if you're not into like scary, satanic-y type movies, this is more straight up on the run serial killer type movie here for number 2, The Devil's Rejects. Um, I love this movie, and I guess if we're gonna then quantify this as horror, then it takes my number 2 spot on this for a couple reasons. Number one, you have 3 of the same characters you had from the first movie. You have Baby Firefly, you have Otis again, and then you have Captain Spaulding with them now in this movie. And it's the 3 of them on the run. They kind of, in their own way, off the rest of the family and move on from there. They're on the run from the law. They are vile human beings. I find this to be one of the most quotable movies I've ever seen, and I know I'm in the minority on this. And the quotes may not be even quote unquote good quotes, but they are sure as hell fun quotes. I gotta say, like, the next shit that comes out of your mouth better sure as hell be some Mark Twain shit, because that's going on your gravestone. Like, there are some good quotes in this movie, though they may not be good quotes, if that makes any sense. Um, this is a movie that I recognize Rob Zombie does something really unique in this, and that is he takes these 3 characters who we watched in the first film as terrible human beings. The second film, they are in some ways more vile than they were in the first film, such as like killing random people at a hotel, or like doing these, just people they happen to see along their travels and taking care of them in very vile, reprehensible ways. And somehow you start to like these characters in this movie. And I can't put a finger exactly how he does that. There are some scenes of like the three of them when they're not around killing people, and it's just like them, going from point A to point B. And there's kind of these moments of, I wouldn't say like intimacy, maybe like familial, jokes that they have or whatever the case is.
Mm-hmm.
But somehow you go from the first movie to the end of the second movie, which I don't know if we can talk about the end of the movie exactly or not, but basically they are surrounded by the law and they're going to be killed, and they make the decision to fuck it, let's do it anyway. They drive off. Freebird starts to play, and it's just this iconic movie scene. I don't care what anyone says of them like going to their doom. And like, I will be perfectly honest when I say that scene has made me cry before, watching these three serial killers who definitely deserve to be killed by the police driving to their doom. And it's this amazing thing where it's this horror movie where you care about the bad guys to the point where you're like genuinely so sad that they die that you have an emotional reaction. Like, I can't even put a finger on that. Like, nobody cries for Michael Myers, when he gets beat up or whatever. Like, it's weird, but totally different tone than the first movie. I admit I'm a bad fan because I still have never seen the third movie in this series. The last one I have never seen, so I got to get to that at some point here. It's been out for like 2 or 3 years now. I still haven't watched it, but this is my number 2. If we can classify this as horror, it's The Devil's Rejects.
Okay.
That was long-winded.
No, it's fine. I expected that out of like the top, 5 or 3 or something. So,
yes. Okay.
So, before we move on to our number 1 picks, did we want to go through ones that Tony had on his list before?
That's a great idea.
Okay. So, I guess just to avoid spoiling, our top lists, our top picks, is your number 1 on his list?
Do you want me to comment on that?
Just like a yes or no.
Yes, it is.
Okay, so is mine.
Okay.
So the best way I can think of to address the ones that he put out there without spoiling our number 1s is, I would say, just in the chat here, like, send me which one yours is so I don't accidentally talk about it, and I'll do the same for you. That way
okay.
we can save those. We'll know what they are, but at least we won't spoil them just in
What
passing.
if we have the same number 1?
Ooh, that would be interesting.
I wouldn't be entirely shocked, but nope, we don't. Okay, there we go.
Okay, cool. All right, so we'll skip those, but we'll cover the other ones that he listed.
All right, let's hit it.
All right, so starting from, I think, the top, because there's 2 images here, and I think I'm looking at the right one. He has the 2017 remake of Stephen King's It, which I've seen the original. I have not seen the more recent one, but I imagine the story is about the same.
I have
not
you seen
this
the new one either.
Okay.
My daughter loves it.
Okay.
She's seen
it.
it.
Yeah, I know it's made a big splash, and it seems to be pretty well received overall.
Yeah.
And I'm pretty sure it was told in the same 2 parts as the original adaptation. And if it's the same, the same approach, I'll probably really enjoy the first half and then hate the second. For anyone who's not familiar with it, it's the story of a bunch of friends who encountered an otherworldly force that personifies itself as a clown when they're young, and decades later they return to the town where they first encountered it to try and put an end to what it's doing. And in the original adaptation, I personally liked the first half and just hated the second. But that's the overall ins and outs of that film/book. Okay, you want to take the next one?
I have mine formatted differently, so if you want to run, I can just throw in comments if you have them.
Okay, sounds good. So the next one in the order that I've got them is Hereditary from 2018, which I have seen. It almost made my list, but there's something about it that just, I don't know, it didn't gel with me.
It's the one with the little girl?
Yeah. Well, that's kind of vague still, but it centers around this girl who seems like there's something off with her. That there's something that's implied that's in her blood, in her heredity, that is, causing bad things to happen around her. But as the story goes on, you start to realize that that's not exactly the case.
Okay.
I don't want to spoil it, but it does take a swerve. The swerve is weird. If you're not versed in some, well, for lack of a better way to put it, in some aspects of the occult, it won't really make any sense to you. So this film draws heavily on some very esoteric stuff. And if you're at all acquainted with it, you'll get more out of it than if you're not. And I can see that development being very divisive. But it is a solid film, but because of that requirement of prior knowledge, that's why it didn't make my list personally.
Okay.
Still worth seeing though.
Haven't seen that one.
Okay, it's solid. Let's see. Next one I have is oddly enough the 2013 remake of Evil Dead, which
Yeah, he actually has both of them on here.
oh, okay. So we can talk about both at the same time, I guess. So the original trilogy, because it was Evil Dead, Evil Dead 2, then Army of Darkness, classic low budget horror comedy films.
For sure.
It was the comedy aspect that really kept them off my list, but basically the story starts with a group of friends going to a cabin in the woods. They find a book in the basement, or it's in like a back room or a shack. I don't remember exactly which. Which is basically,
I think,
the Necronomicon. They stupidly read it out loud, and the dead start coming to life and possessing them and tormenting them and things. So low budget but very entertaining flicks. They get sillier as they go, but some would argue that's a good thing.
Still my favorite musical of all time.
I still haven't seen that. I'm kicking myself for not having seen it when it was playing in town years and years ago. But the remake in 2013 tried to take a more serious tone, and I think that was a bit to its detriment.
Okay.
It was higher budget. It was more grim, and it didn't quite have the charm of the original. But the original from the 80s is a very solid film. Okay, moving right along. Talked about that one. He has Jaws on his list, which
never heard of it.
It's one of those where killer animals have to be for anyone who doesn't know the story of Jaws. It's about a killer shark. That's pretty much the long and short of it. Very iconic music. That sting that Cody is doing. It's a classic. It never scared me all that much, maybe because I never grew up around the ocean or anything. But for people who did, I gather it was a really frightening film. But still worth a watch. The sequels, all three of them. That's a callback to our friend Joe.
Only two.
The sequels aren't really worth watching at all, but the first one, it's enjoyable. Next is It Follows, another one I haven't seen, unfortunately.
I think I've seen this one.
Yeah.
This is, this one?
I was going to bring up the IMDb
description. It's essentially a scary movie told like through an STD. You have to have sex with somebody to get rid of the thing that's going to kill you, essentially. So it's like, it's weird. I feel like there's some heavy commentary there on something, but
gotcha. Yeah, it's one that it's on my to watch list. I just haven't gotten around to it because time is finite. But I've heard good things. So that was on his list. He also has The Host from 2013. Now there's a couple of movies with this title. I just want to make sure I've got the right one.
I don't know if I know this one.
So I was thinking it was the Korean monster movie, but that came out in 2006. So I think he's talking about a different The Host. So not The Hose, The Host. There we go.
Stephanie Meyer's
I think so.
Wait, okay. Actually, that was a total joke. Seriously?
Yep. It's adapted from the novel. Okay. Well, interesting pick there, Tony. I haven't read the book or seen the movie, so here's what was that?
All right. He won't be on the podcast ever again. Sounds good.
So the IMDb description says, when an unseen enemy threatens mankind by taking over their bodies and erasing their memories, Melanie Strider risks everything to protect the people she cares about. So guessing like an alien possession or like mind control sort of setup. Um,
Maybe.
maybe, but yeah, again, I haven't seen this one.
Yeah, I don't know that one.
Yeah, it's from the author who wrote Twilight, so I don't have high hopes, but apparently it struck a chord with our friends, so maybe there's something to it.
Yeah, maybe. He
Maybe.
does work in Hollywood, so there is that.
I mean, there's
We
there's
didn't
that.
start the podcast by saying that, but our friend is a cameraman, or last I heard he was a cameraman at least.
Mhm. Yeah, which is pretty damn awesome.
Yeah.
But also why he can't be here with us today because work takes priority.
Yeah.
Okay, moving on to something that I think we can both agree on more than his last pick, Halloween, the original from 1978. And I've never been big on, I'll watch slasher flicks, but they've never been my favorite style of horror. But the Halloween movies are always very watchable.
They can be fun, but they're often not done well or lazily,
Yeah.
I guess is a better way to put it.
Yeah, I mean, there's some good performances in the original Halloween. Donald Pleasance as Dr. Loomis, really knocks it out of the park. The fact that you can shoot Michael Myers, you can stab him, you can push him down the stairs, whatever. He just keeps getting back up. That is, and the only way to contain him is to basically knock him out with drugs. That's an interesting approach. You can't kill this thing. You can only slow it down. You can only sequester it.
He is Captain Kirk. What can you do?
Oh yeah, yeah. The original mask was a William Shatner mask, spray painted white. So fun bit of trivia.
There we go.
Okay. Moving right along. 2007. Trick or Treat. Which have you seen this one?
I haven't, but it keeps popping up everywhere now. Like,
Okay,
am I missing out on this?
You are actually. It's an anthology movie. So this one, it's a series of short stories that they seem kind of disconnected at first, but they do all kind of tie together.
Okay.
Around the central figure that is looks like a little kid with like a pumpkin mask on, and he kind of is weaving his way through these various events that are happening. And when it all comes together, it does so in a very satisfying way.
Okay.
So yeah, if you like shorter form horror, it's an easy recommendation in my book.
Okay.
Next, he has the original Nightmare on Elm Street, 1984. Also a good pick. I do believe also let me double check on this before I stick my foot in my mouth here. Let's see. Yep, the first screen appearance of a certain Mr. Johnny Depp, believe it or not. So if you want to see like where he got his start, yeah, it's worth tracking down. Plus, it's just a very interesting take on the slasher genre because Freddy Krueger, the killer in question, is already dead, but his spirit it lives on and he kills people in their dreams. So the whole gimmick to this series is you can't fall asleep or Freddy's going to get you.
Yeah.
And it's just a very as I mentioned when I talked about Wes Craven's New Nightmare, it's a very outside the box take on the slasher genre, and it's worth checking out, at least some of them. Continuing that thread, his next pick is Friday the 13th, the original from 1980. Much more standard type of slasher killer, sort of. There's a bit of a twist in the original, where the killer isn't necessarily who you think it is. And
dun dun dun.
Yeah, I don't want to spoil that more than I already have, but it's it takes place at a summer camp where years and years ago a little boy drowned, and it's implied that his spirit is still there, killing people who who go to the camp. So there's it's fairly what at this point is standard slasher fare, but still a classic in the genre. If you're into that sort of thing and you haven't checked it out, go for it. His next one came out this year, which I've heard it's good. I know nothing about it. It's called Barbarian.
Yeah.
So let
me
like
look
Conan
up the Barbarian. No.
Yeah, I heard good word of mouth, but I don't know anything about the plot. According to IMDb, it's a short description. A woman staying at an Airbnb discovers that the house she rented is not what it seems. So that could be anything. It
Yep.
could be a slasher flick. It could be ghosts. It could be some sort of creature that lives in the cellar or aliens. It could be anything. I don't know, but I get the impression that's part of the appeal. I feel that this is probably one of those films where the less you know about it going in, the better. So
Could be
it's one that
cheaper
was
than
on my radar,
could be cheaper
but
than standard rent. You never know.
yeah,
Could be anything.
yeah, yeah. It's one that was on my radar when it came out, and I was like, oh, it's a horror movie that came out in the summer, which is weird, and it's gotten good reviews, which is also weird. So whenever it hits streaming, I'm sure I'll give that one a watch. But right now, your guess is as good as mine, audience.
Yep.
Um, so we're about halfway through. His next pick is From Dusk Till Dawn, 1996. And I know I've seen this at some point. I know it involves vampires.
Yeah.
Yeah, it didn't stick with me. But if you like vampires, if you like a kind of a, more gritty, actiony kind of approach to, people fighting to survive against vampires, I seem to remember it being a visceral film. You might enjoy it.
If you like your Tarantino as an actor, not as the director,
Oh yeah, yeah, that's true.
or he may be the director. I don't actually know who the director. No, he's not the director. It's probably a
No,
Rodriguez film, right?
I think so. Well, let's look it up. We're talking about
Yeah.
it. From Dusk Till Dawn. Let's see. Directed by Robert Rodriguez.
Okay.
So yeah, very much in that sort of gritty, actiony style, but with vampires. Um, so not my thing, but your mileage may vary.
Yeah.
Talked about The Descent. His next one is a French film from the look of it.
Yeah, I didn't know this one either.
Yeah, translates to Inside, but I'm going to butcher the pronunciation. L'Intérieur is the French version of the title. Let me see if I can dig up a description here, because if you just type Inside into IMDb, it brings up a lot of results. Go figure. So this was from 2007. So I think I found it. All right. Yep. So IMDb says 4 months after the death of her husband, a woman on the brink of motherhood is tormented in her home by a strange woman who wants her unborn baby. So, if that sort of thing squicks you out, be warned.
Also, may
But
want to consider which state you live in. I didn't say that.
yeah, but this was made in France, so it's okay.
Yeah, it's okay there.
But yeah, so I could definitely see this one being disturbing, possibly gory, depending. But it does seem like it, if done well, it could be a very unsettling 90 minutes or however long it is.
It's 9 months actually, Justin.
Up, but tish.
No.
Let's see. We covered that one. He has 2004's remake of Dawn of the Dead, which was a much more actiony take on Romero's original Dawn of the Dead, which almost made my list.
2004 version? Interesting.
Yeah. I prefer the original myself, but
Tom,
I mean,
leave me alone. Come on.
Yeah. But I mean, 2004, it was a solid film. It tried to be a bit edgier. It tried to be a bit, darker. Whether or not it works is, up to interpretation. But if you like zombies, it's a decent remake. It's nothing that I would recommend over the original, but it's a bit more accessible maybe to a modern audience. Let's see. Talked about that one. Another zombie film, Train to Busan, which I have seen. It's a Korean film from 2016, and I didn't find it all that scary, but the interplay between the characters is kind of what made this one. It centers around kind of a deadbeat dad and his daughter who are on a train trying to, I think he's trying to take his daughter to visit her mother, who I believe he's separated with. But while they're on the train, a zombie apocalypse breaks out, including among some of the passengers on the train. And suddenly this, loser lowlife who has never really done anything right for himself, his relationships, his kid, has to step up and be the responsible one. And there's some really intense moments during it. There's some good cinematography. The ending scene or sequence is actually very moving. I don't want to spoil it, but it actually it didn't quite bring me to tears, but it did. It kind of made me choke up a tiny bit, where it's
Hmm.
just like, oh, okay, that was important. It's coming to the fore, and it's also very tense because you're not sure what the reaction from the other people involved is going to be. I don't want to spoil it any more than that, but
That's fair.
um, it's a very enjoyable zombie flick. Again, there's subtitles because it's Korean, but I do highly recommend this one. Um,
It's
so next
got
one is
three more, I think, there yet.
the Autopsy of Jane Doe, which I'm not familiar with myself. So
Mm-mm.
let's see. Autopsy of Jane Doe from 2016. Okay. A father and son, both coroners, are pulled into a complex mystery while attempting to identify the body of a young woman who is apparently harboring dark secrets. Uh, so it's listed as horror, mystery, and thriller. Um,
Generic title listing.
yeah, again, I don't know anything about this one. It could be ghosts. It could be some sort of like secret that the town is harboring. It could
Yeah, that
be
could be anything.
anything. Yeah. So I really
Jane
don't know
Doe
on
could
this
be
one.
John Doe. Who knows?
Yeah. So this one, your guess is as good as mine, but since I've never heard of it and since one of our friends liked it, well, I might check it out. Okay. Almost done with his. So that one,
We just still have two more.
next, I think so. So he has The Shining, which did you mention that one in your
Yep,
honorable
that was
mention? Okay,
honorable
so there's
mention.
that
I
one.
did.
Okay. Scream,
Yeah,
1996.
thought about
So
it.
I considered it, but I mentioned in when I talked about Wes Craven's New Nightmare that it was very meta. So that is also the case with Scream.
Yeah,
Scream is kind of a deconstruction of the slasher genre,
good call.
except there actually is a slasher killer involved, and it does some interesting things with the tropes that are endemic to the genre. Depending on how much that idea appeals to you, your mileage may vary on this one. I watched it back when it came out. I probably haven't watched it since. So it's not really my cup of tea, but I know a lot of people really enjoy this one.
Yeah, it's a fun one.
Yeah. And last on his list that we haven't already covered, and that isn't already, in our top number one slots, is A Quiet Place. 2018. Um, I haven't seen this one, but I've read the book. Have you seen this one, Cody?
Yeah, I've seen this one. This was the Krasinski film, right?
I believe
John
so. I mean,
Krasinski and Emily Blunt
yes.
starred, and he also directed this one. This is
Hmm.
basic basic premise is you can't make noise. There's some kind of dystopia future where I don't even know if it's the future. It's like dystopia now, where
Hmm.
you can't make any noise, or these creatures that exist in the world will like basically come and eviscerate you more or less. And so it's the story of them like not only trying to survive in that world, but also thrive and raise a family. And like, how do you teach kids to never make noise? And like, how do you give birth and never make noise? And there's all these kind of like moments that we would just kind of take for granted that they don't have the luxury of doing. And then, of course, the moment comes when they have to face these creatures, and then that changes kind of their strategy of what they're going to try to do with their family to keep them safe. And has a fairly surprise ending to it. I don't know if it's the same as the book or not, but maybe it is. Maybe it's not.
Okay. It's one that is on my to watch list, so
It was
no
good. It was
spoilers.
really good. I was impressed with Jim directing the movie. So
Okay.
yeah,
All right. So that brings us to the end of Tony's picks that aren't also our number ones. So, uh, given that we had some back
let's
and
do
forth
it.
here, did you want to do your number one first, or should we keep the order and have me go?
I don't care. How about now that I know what yours is, I will
Hmm.
even volunteer to do mine first because I do feel like yours is a more traditional horror movie than mine is.
Fair enough. Go
So
ahead.
I will go first on this one. So my number one film for the top scary movies for this Spooktober episode is from 2011. This is from director Drew Goddard, and it is Thor: Love and Thunder. Just kidding, it's not, but it does star Thor. This is Cabin in the Woods, which
Hmm.
is probably equally comedy as it is horror or close to, but I love this film. I don't know that I love it as much as my number two film, but I do love this film in terms of a fun horror movie. So the basic premise here on this one, if you haven't seen Cabin in the Woods yet, is there are five teenagers that go off to a cabin in the woods. Stop if you've heard this before, am I right? But in this case, that is not the real story that's happening here in this one. You've seen this one, I know, right?
Oh yes, yeah,
Yeah.
it's a great film.
So the idea, I guess, here is that there is this kind of like covert organization who lures kids to this cabin in the woods, and they essentially, not spoiling the overall plot here, but they eventually are lured into, I believe, the basement of the cabin, if I'm not mistaken, where there are all of these artifacts laying around. And let's just say whichever artifact they pick up first has dire consequences behind the scenes in this secret organization, which determines the whole movie at that point. And, you know, if you've ever wondered if they could make a fantastic choose your own adventure into a horror film, this is kind of what they come up with. But it is kind of fun. It's just one of those movies that if you haven't seen it before, when you watch it and understand what I'm talking about, like, you know, you would definitely want to watch this again if something else happened the second time, let's say. And that'd be a whole nother fun movie with everything going on here. But there are some really classic scenes in this one later on. I was reading a little more about this one for the podcast. The director won't confirm whether or not they are officially the new record holder for the most blood used in a movie. There's some debate over that with a few real strong contenders. He is estimating that they used over 1 million gallons of blood on this film. There is a particular scene involving an elevator, which already sounds a bit weird if you heard what I said about the movie earlier. But it is very bloody and very gory and very soppy, for lack of a better adjective there, I guess. And yeah, like I said, there are a couple twists at the end of the movie you may not see coming, even with all of the bizarre things that happen in this movie. It's such a fun ride. It's got a little comedy to it, a lot of horror to it, and it is pretty fun. Cabin in the Woods, that's my number one.
Never
Justin,
gonna get to see
comment
him,
on number
man.
one. Yeah, the merman.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm thinking back with that claim about the most blood used. Well, first of all, fantastic film. I do agree. But God, there was that lawnmower scene in Dead Alive where I swear that's the bloodiest thing I've ever seen on camera. So I'd have to go back and like do a comparison between the two to see
Yeah.
if more blood was spilled. But
Yeah, I can't remember. There was another film listed I can't remember, and then they even had like is it the elevator in The Shining that had
oh yeah, the flood.
that? And
Yeah.
I think they said something like they ended up having to film it 5 times, and each time had to be like more blood they had to make.
Oh,
So
that could be part of it then.
it's
Yeah.
craziness, but anyway.
But yeah, fantastic film. And yeah, it was the comedy element that kept it off my list, but it is just a good time from beginning to end.
Yeah, totally agree.
Yeah, my pick for number one doesn't have a whole lot of comedy at all. And what
January 6th, 2021.
yeah, I want to talk about a horror film. Um, but yeah, there are some lines that are funny here and there. But overall, this is played very straight, and I've loved it since the first time I saw it. And even God, at this point, 40 years later, it still holds up as my favorite horror film of all time. John Carpenter's The Thing, 1982. And if you haven't seen this one, well, I hope you don't speak Norwegian because the entire plot is spoiled in the opening scenes if you speak Norwegian. But
Seriously?
yeah, when they're the Norwegians in the helicopter are chasing the dog through the Antarctic snow, they're speaking Norwegian and they're basically explaining,
Oh, wow.
saying, oh, get away from it, don't touch it, it's not a dog, it's a thing. And so it really does kind of spoil that twist.
Huh.
But if you know of the film, you probably know things get really gory really quick. So it takes place in an Antarctic research facility where, very remote, There's no help except for like supply ships that come in every so often. So it's, a very isolated area. And one day, the researchers at this base, they see a dog, coming through the snow, just like running out in the wild, and they're like, well, where did it come from? That's weird. And then over the horizon, a helicopter is chasing it, and there's a guy with like a rifle trying to shoot this dog, and they're like, what the hell is going on? And I don't remember exactly why the helicopter crashes, but because it has been a while since I last watched this, but it does. So they're left with this mystery of, okay, why were these people from this other base, trying to kill this dog?
Yeah.
What's going on? So they take the dog into their base, and they go off to try and see what was going on at the Norwegian base, and everyone's dead, and appears to have been dead for quite some time. Some of them in very gruesome fashion. There's people that are burned. There's people whose wrists have been slit, and it's like blood icicles that are hanging down because they've frozen to death.
Sure.
Like the place is trashed, and it really sets this atmosphere of what the hell is going on. So they go back to their base, and they try to radio for help, and I think it's like weather conditions or something that keeps the signal from getting through. So they basically just have to wait it out until they can get someone to come in and figure out what happened. And during this time, the fact that the dog is not a dog becomes incredibly evident. It is something. I'm not going to say what it was because I've already spoiled enough, but it is something that can infect other people and other creatures. Like anything that comes into contact with the fluids of this thing that looks like a dog is now also a thing. But they act just like they used to until the thing is cornered or it tries to claim another victim, in which case it starts to change, and it can change into anything.
Until Roddy Piper puts on his sunglasses.
They Live, also a great movie. But yeah, this was made in 1982, and it still features some of the most impressive creature effects I've ever seen. Like, this is pure Lovecraftian shapeless horror that is ravaging this base that is very ill-equipped to fight it off. They have a few guns, but they really have to jury rig whatever they can to try and keep this thing at bay, to try and chase it off and try to survive long enough for help to arrive. And the ending scene in this film is still one of the most perfect endings to a movie I've ever seen. I will not spoil it, but it is open to interpretation in a variety of ways, and it is haunting. And even after 40 years, this film is still a masterpiece. If you somehow haven't seen it, go track it down in whatever way you can. It is a fantastic piece of cinema.
I'm going to spoil the ending. Liam Neeson has glass on his hands, and he's about to fight the wolf. And then the camera cuts away. That's a different movie. All right, well, good choice. That was almost made mine. If I did a top 25, I might have made it on there. But, well, we have some quick results to finish this up before we go out of here today, Mr. Henry.
Okay.
You ready for these?
I am.
According to our weird scoring tonight, because we just basically gave all of Tony's 3 points since he submitted way too many movies. We have our 7th place movie, and I'll move up from there. 7th place with 13 points is 28 Days Later.
Okay.
And we have a tie for 4th place between my number 2, The Devil's Rejects, your number 2, The Taking of Deborah Logan, and also one up here tied, which is Alien.
Okay.
14 points. Coming in 3rd place with 15 points was Saw. And oddly enough, with the way we did the scoring, we have a tie for 1st place between your number 1 and my number 1, which Tony had on his list both as well. So The Thing and Cabin in the Woods.
All right.
Some solid choices all around.
Yeah.
All right.
There you have it, dear listeners. I guess if you're looking for something to to watch for spooky season, and you were kind of at a loss, hopefully we've helped.
If you watch all of those, get back to us. That's a lot of films.
Indeed.
That was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we have one more episode and set up here for you for Spooktober, as we're going to get to our top scary video games. to wrap us up
Yes.
next week, and that is going to be interesting as well, I'm sure.
Hmm.
We'll see. I'm curious what Mr. Henry will pick here, and forget, did we have others joining us on this one or not? I don't remember.
I hope so. I mean, it's been
Yeah.
fun, just you and me, but having a third perspective, to chime in, or fourth even, would be, would make a much more level playing field, I think.
Yeah, we'll have to see. We have a lot of people I know that play Resident Evil, but maybe Dave or Brett or somebody would get in. We'll have to check next week. I think Brett and his wife actually might stream some scary games they play together, if I'm not
Hmm.
mistaken. I think on his Twitch channel.
Oh, nice.
They might do that once in a while on just reaction shots of her screaming and stuff. But I could be wrong, but I think they do that. But anyway,
All right.
well, I think we've rambled for quite a while here tonight, so we'll wrap
Yeah.
this up with our spooky theme song, I guess, tonight. So,
All right.
friends,
So,
friends, 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 friends. Friends,
occasionally
friends, friends, occasionally. Dun, 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 dun,
disagreeing.
dun, not disagreeing. Take care, everyone. We will see you next time.
Yep. Ciao.
Enjoy.